This morning we're going to look at Azazel again. If you missed any of the previous teachings, you go to the Last Day series and find the appropriate chapters or videos, really, because we're not up to Azazel in the written format yet, and catch up. Azazel is a character that we find, a fallen angel, in the book of Enoch. Now, if you're new, you need to listen to the other video teachings that I've done on this subject, because you're way behind. And you probably never heard of Azazel. Well, he's a real evil being that you can find if you have an Enoch, a book of Enoch, whatever translation. You'll find him in the early chapters. If you don't, I recommend you get one and read, especially those early chapters, the book of Enoch. So I'm going to pick up where I left off and move forward. Some of this will be a review, and some of this will be new. It was at this time God charged the angel Raphael, a good angel, by the way, to imprison Azazel within the earth. This is before the flood, Noah's flood. In 1 Enoch 10, verses 5 and 6 now, depending what translation you're reading from, whether it's a Lawrence translation or whatever translation you're reading from, not all the chapters will line up with each other. So when I say it's going to be this certain chapter, for instance, I'll read certain chapters in this write-up about Enoch. But if you have, for instance, which I have here today, a Lawrence translation, it's going to be one chapter earlier than the chapters that I'm going to be reading from today from a different translation. So you have to search around depending what translation you have. I use all of them, to tell you the truth. It was at this time God charged the angel Raphael to imprison Azazel within the earth. The Lord God said to Raphael, from 1 Enoch now, bind Azazel hand and foot, and cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the desert, which is Dudael, also known as Dudain, and cast him therein, and place upon him rough and jagged rocks. Azazel was to be imprisoned inside his cherub in the rocks, and covered him with darkness, and let him abide there within the earth. And previous teachings, if you're new, that you have missed. If you don't, the old timers will remember that I said where he was cast into was Gilgal Raphaim, which is just northeast area of Israel's southern Syria and northwestern Jordan area, to give you an idea where that's located. Just southeast of Mount Hermon, northeast of the Sea of Galilee. Hopefully that gives you a geographical picture of where it's located. The book of Enoch, 1 Enoch, describes the process by which the angel Azazel was imprisoned within the earth and how the biblical flood came about. It therein describes a comet which was redirected by the angel Raphael so as to strike the earth, causing great destruction thereupon. Now, this is this person's theory. And I have no problem with it. I don't think that's all that caused the flood of Noah, or there might be another possibility what created that narrow crater, that Gilgal-Raphaim, as we know it today, is the holding prison for these evil angels. It could have been a crater, it could have been something else. But if you want to use the explanation of things that we know of, and the possibilities of it happening because we know meteorites, I'm not too sure a comet created this hole in the ground, this prison for these evil angels. It could have been, or it could have been a meteorite that got the process started and Raphael finished the job. We'll never know for sure. In 1 Enoch 45, verses 3 and 4, and it might be different in your translations, describes an object, a very large comet falling on the earth, by which the earth was shaking, causing a great commotion on the earth. Yes, it says that. It necessarily doesn't say a large comet, but it's a large object falling on the earth. So whatever Raphael used, it fell on the earth. And I just can imagine the kind of commotion that it would have created. This might have happened just minutes before the flood, as far as we know. And it probably wasn't an event that caused mass loss of life. We just don't know how it all went down. We're just given a glimpse of the possibilities. This comet is the heaven which fell to the earth, as mentioned in 1 Enoch 83, verse 3. Its impact crater is the great abyss, spoken in 83, verse 4. Let's see if I can find it real quick. My translation will be different, but let's see if I could find it. If I can, I'm not going to spend too much time looking for it, but here, in the Lawrence translation, it's not verses 4. It's more in verse 5. And falling to the earth, and it's in Lawrence translation 82:5. And falling to the earth, I saw likewise the earth absorbed by a great abyss, and mountains suspended over mountains. And of course, it goes on to say other things concerning that event. Its impact crater, what was created from it, is the greatest abyss, spoken of 1 Enoch 83:4. It also is the very same impact crater that is mentioned in 1 Enoch 88, verse 1 and verse 3. The impact crater was located in a desert called Dudain. Dain means valley. If you want to know how it's spelled, it's D-U-I-D-I, D-A-I-N. D-U-I-D-A-I-N. And it means valley. It's another way of saying Dudael. One step further, Gilgal-Raphaim. The impact crater was located in a desert called Dudain. Dain means valley, also known as Dudael. Del, the D-A-E-L, Dudael, also means valley. From an old English word, del, comes our word Del. So D-A-E-L becomes our English word D-A-L-E. The word Dudael, by one account, also translates as God's cauldron. This name aptly describes an impact site typified by a round molten hole being punched into the earth. The comet's impact caused a great geological upheaval, a result of which brought flood upon the land. It could have been. Or one of the things that caused it. We know that waters came from above, but in actuality, more waters came from below. Great fissures were opened up along the then sea areas, which were much lower sea levels than we have today. And it covered the land. I've already covered that in the Spiritual Warfare series. You can go and find that in the video in written format. And of course, you get that in 1 Enoch 84, verses 1 through 9, the comet's impact that caused a great geological upheaval, the result of which the flood upon the land occurred. Now, let's see if I can find that quickly. If not, we'll move on. I just don't have time to spend too much time searching out. That would be probably 88 in my translation. Let's see. If not, maybe 87. Yeah, if you have a Lawrence translation, I'll just let you read it for yourself. This is where it uses the cows to teach a mystery in the story about the water being boiled up and rose over the earth. And it continues that much water was over darkness and clouds. And then he surveyed the height of the water, and it was elevated above the villages, and it flowed over the village and stood higher than the earth. And it talks about the ark. And then the waters descended, and the dry land appeared. And then it finishes in verse 12. Then the white cow, which became a man, because it's all related in a cow mystery for some reason, in the vision that is being used as a illustration of what was coming to man. Then the white cow, which became a man, went out of the ship, and he had 3 cows with them. Enoch's sons, that is. And then it goes on to say, one of the 3 cows was white, resembling the cow. One of them was red as blood, and one of them was black, and the white cow left them. And it goes on. It's very interesting, by the way. In the Lawrence translation, you find it in 88, starting verse 1, chapter 88. I don't have time to read all of it, but if you're interested. If you're not, just take my word for it. And then water flowed from within the earth, while rain fell in torrents from the sky. In 1 Enoch, chapter, 57, verses 4 through 7, tells of this comet cutting a burning valley into the earth's crust. The excavation of this molten valley by the comet which struck the earth caused a great convulsion and the convulsions of the waters. Molten metal and rock flowed through this great gash in the earth's crust, and the undermined ground collapsed. What speedily flowed into this molten valley, imprisoning the 200 angels and the cherubim within the rapidly cooling rock, where they are now to this day being imprisoned within the earth. Well, are they still imprisoned in the earth? That's something we're going to have to take a look at in the future. Indeed, 1 Enoch, chapters 88 verse 3 explains that the rebellious angels were stoned from heaven, a reference to the comet which struck in their vicinity, and in such a way that angel Raphael cast them in an abyss of the earth. From Enoch we learned that abyss was narrow and deep, and horrible and dark. The furrow this astral plowshare plowed was by some called the valley of death. Now, asteroids, meteorites, comets are symbolized as plowshares in Far Eastern ancient sutra texts. It is the valley of the shadow of death mentioned in Psalm 23:4. A Greek philosopher calls it the valley of misery. As does a Neoplatonist ceremonial magician, Cornelius Agrippa referred to the place of the angels' entrapment as being the valley of misery, in the third book of chapter 18 of occult philosophy. Occultists are big in trying to figure out where Azazel is imprisoned. And by the way, they're also I don't expect any of you to really get into any of this occultist crap, and that's the only way you could describe it. Evil. That's all that can be produced from it. Evil outcomes by diving into all areas of occult practices. But you have to do your research to know some of the facts, including even studying the Quran. Not as an instrument that was inspired by God, but as something that was inspired by evil forces that want to mislead. Talking in our day, our present human society, to go down the path of destruction. Now, it's very big in the occult world of trying to figure out when Azazel will be released. They don't have a clue, by the way, by what I have researched out, of when that possibly can happen, if it already happened. I don't agree with this author in his guesstimate of when that might happen also. In fact, what I'm reading from today, I don't agree with several different things, more than several different things, in his searching of understanding of who this Azazel being was, how it's been hidden, why it's been hidden for so long. Well, out of sight, out of mind. For thousands of years, he was imprisoned. Therefore, out of sight, out of mind mentality developed, especially in the Christian world, that forgot about this evil being, by the way, which were not part of the 200 watchers that came down. He already was here. And he kind of became their captain. And I believe he was just following orders from Satan. And I'll get into that more and more as we look into this. Who is the chief evil angel, if that's what you want to call him, that governs all the wickedness and evil that takes place. And he had followers. not just in the human form, but also in the angelic form. Now, I don't want to get too ahead of the game here, so let me continue reading. Where was I? Indeed, in 1 Enoch explained the rebellious angels were stoned from heaven, a reference to the comet which struck in their vicinity in such a way that angel Raphael cast them into the abyss of the earth. From Enoch we learn that the abyss was narrow and deep, and horrible and dark. The Pharaoh, this astral plowshare plowed, was by some called the Valley of Death. And then asteroids, meteorites, comets are symbolized as plowshares in Far Eastern ancient sutra texts. It is the valley of the shadow of death mentioned in Psalm 23:4. And of course, others called it the valley of misery, which I already covered. And also in the valley of misery is also mentioned in the third book, chapter 18 of Occult Philosophy. It would seem Agrippa was also familiar with the writings of another Greek philosopher. The Greek word for this abyss is Tartarus. The Expository Dictionary of Bible Words explains that the Tartarus was the Greek name for the abyss which rebellious gods were confined. 2 Peter 2:4, the Greeks also called the place of the angels' entrapment Hades, home of the god Hades, also known as Pluto, who is also Azazel, who, according to the Greek philosopher, poet, in his Theogonony, dwells under the earth. The place of the angels' entrapment was also known as the Valley of Eleusis. In Mesopotamia, this abyss was variously known as the Irkalla, Irkalla, and Aralu, Aralu. The Hebrews called it Sheol, Sheol. The Egyptians knew this valley of death as Arentet, spelled Arentet, named after their gods, the Neturu. The singular version of that, by the way, is Neter, Neter. Remember that, Neter, Neter. Who were therein entrapped were Horus, one name by which the Egyptians knew Azazel. The chief among the Manas, highest ranking amongst the angels who accompanied him to the earth, were thrust into the darkness of Amenta, Amenta, which is to say, into the underworld, beneath the earth. The underworld is also known as the netherworld, which is another way of saying, remember I told you to write it down? Neter, Neter. It's another way of saying the netherworld. Amenta, Amenta, receives its name from the fact that it was placed where was entrapped the fallen angels, who they alternatively called the Manes, Manes. The following Egyptian mystery teaching speaks of Azazel being interred within the earth, and extraordinary enough, being alive and well therein. The great god Azazel, Lord of Amenta, he was no god, by the way. Humans made him god, but he was no god. Joined to the earth in the inner part great, being laid on the earth, he is not dead in the Amenta. He is a glorious being in it. And that is straight from the Papyrus of Ani, from the Egyptian Book of Dead, plate 16. I'll read to you again. The great god Azazel, Lord of Amenta, joined to the earth in the inner part great, being laid on the earth. He is not dead in Amenta. He is a glorious being in it. And again, Osiris, Azazel's cherub behemoth. That's interesting. Greater is he than God's all. I have granted to him to rule in the underworld. But his sons, Horus, the angel of Azazel, is as his heir upon his throne within the lake of fire. That's also from the papyrus of Ani, from the Egyptian Book of the Dead. These angels were said to be cast into a lake of fire of molten lava, which was caused by the comet impacting the earth. The tremendous energy generated by its impact melted the solid bedrock beneath it, which the angels and their cherubim were imprisoned with the molten rock subsequently solidified. This comet impact caused great regional destruction in Palestine and in other areas. Was a cause of the biblical flood. Behemoth is the name of Azazel's cherub. Cherubim are named in the same way as boats and ships and aircrafts are named here on earth. It was at the time of the comet strike when Azazel's cherub, Behemoth, was encased within a rock beneath the desert called Dudain. Behemoth, Azazel's cherub, occupied a waste wilderness, a desert, named Dudain. And that, of course, is in 1 Enoch 60, verse 8. Azazel was imprisoned within his cherub Behemoth beneath the desert known as Dudain by the comet which struck the earth. Dudain, also known as Dudael, also known as the pit of Dudael, where Azazel was imprisoned with the earth, is identified in Revelations chapter 9. Well, what is that referring to? Let's look at it. Revelations chapter 9. Well, let's just save that. I'll come back to it. I looked at it, but let me come back to it. Let me continue reading so I can get to a certain spot before we end this morning. Azazel was imprisoned in the earth and is identified in Revelation chapter 9 as being located at the great rivers of Euphrates in the Middle East. For a look at the Jewish religious custom which commemorates this event, see Leviticus 16, which we already did. Azazel persists in the corruptive activity. Therefore, Israel begins offerings and casts one lot for the Lord so that God, might accept atonement for all sins of Israel, and one lot for Azazel so that he might bear the burden of the sins of Israel. Now, in Revelations 9, this author says that this imprisonment of Azazel is identified in Revelation 9, verses 13 through 15, as being located at the area of the great river Euphrates. And of course, he's referring to, now we'll take a look at it. And the sixth angel said in Revelation chapter 9, and I heard a voice in the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the four angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year, for to slay the third part of man. Now, is that the same area of Gilgal-Raphaim? Well, Euphrates is still much further northeast of the area that's referred to in Revelation. So, if you take this author's point of view, which I necessarily don't do, so that's why I'm stopping here to clarify this, I think there's two different events that has taken place in Revelation chapter 9 concerning what is going to be released. This just happens to be one of the events where it clearly says in the instructions given to the sixth angel, which is different than the instructions given to the fifth angel, which also something an event that happens. If you go back to verse 1 in chapter 9, and the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. Star there meaning another angel. And he opened the bottomless pit, and then certain things happen. You can read it for yourself throughout that chapter. And you get to verse 11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit. All kinds of evilness gets released from this pit when this angel comes down and opens it up. You can read the chapter leading, the verses leading up in this chapter to verse 11. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name is in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue had his name Apollyon. Now everyone assumed that is Satan in Christianity. Not everyone, but a lot do. I'm telling you, no, it isn't. Then who is it? And that all happens with the fifth angel. And then we get to the sixth angel. And this is where I disagree with this author. There are two different events happening in Revelation 9. Because the sixth angel sounded, and he heard a voice from the four horns of the golden altar, which is before God, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, loose the four angels who are bound in a great river Euphrates. And of course, then there's certain things happen when they're loose, which we'll get to. Two different events. So as reading this information to you, I don't want you to lump this all together in one event. No, a fifth angel did what he did, and the sixth angel did what he did. Certain things happened with the fifth angel once he did what he did, and certain things happened with the sixth angel to do what he did. When the sixth angel released those four angels, which were loosed, which started a whole other set of events that we yet have covered yet. So, bottom line is, don't combine the two. They're two different events. One's dealing with an evil angel king called Abaddon and Apollyon. The other are the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Two different events. Now, let's move forward. Just wanted to clarify that. Jude 6 speaks of angels' imprisonment within the earth, and the angels that did not keep their own position but left their proper dwelling have been kept by him, that's God, in eternal chains in the nether gloom, encased within the earth. as does 2 Peter 2:4. God did not spare the angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell, Sheol, and committed them to pits of nether gloom within the earth to be kept until the judgments. The Acts of Thomas tells us, I, Azazel, am he, and it's too cold in here. I, Azazel, am he who inhabits and possesses the abyss of Tartarus, referring to this abyss as the great chasm in which that serpent, what serpent? Could he be referring to a Genesis serpent? Was swallowed up. A clear reference to Azazel's imprisonment within the earth. There is another reason why the angel Azazel was associated with the serpent imagery represented of him in the Bible, as snakes are known to make their homes underground, a characteristic to Azazel's imprisonment within the earth. When in Genesis 3:14 it was said of the serpent, thus shall ye eat all the days of your life, it is because this prophesied of future judgment against the angel Azazel, God sent Azazel to interment within the earth. It is the Genesis serpent, Azazel, and the angels entrapped within the earth, of which the Apocrypha of John warns its readers. Guard yourself against the angels of misery, the angels within the valley of misery, the demons of chaos, and all who entrap you. Beware the trap in the bowels of the underworld. Now, everyone just assumes. I haven't really gotten into this yet. Kind of hinted around it several times, but never really got into Genesis chapter 3 concerning that serpent. Genesis chapter 3 verse 1. Now the serpent, everyone just assumes this is Satan. And let me express to you, Satan is the general of all these evil beings, including Azazel. And I'll try to prove that out in the months ahead. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast. Now, I have it written back here. If I have time, let me see if I can find it. Something very interesting. Let's see if I have it. Beast. Everyone assumes maybe the serpent was, not everyone, but many people do assume that the serpent was Satan. But now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. Was it truly a beast of the field? Was it truly some kind of a animal-looking snake that God created, that got possessed by Satan to do its bidding, to deceive Eve and then Adam? Well, I don't think it was a snake. I don't think it was an animal being, even though the Hebrew word for beast carries that definition, but it's not the only definition in the Hebrew for beast. Not only an animal, flesh and blood being that God created to roam this earth. It also has a different meaning, and I'll read it to you. If I can find it real quick. Bizarre living beings mentioned in Ezekiel were like birds and animals, but were composite beings. They looked like birds and animals, but they were composite beings. They could not be described adequately by human language, for they also had the forms of humans, each with faces of men, lion, ox, and eagle. However, they did not resemble flesh and blood in their appearance, and were tied to the movement of the Spirit. Well, what does that mean? There's another option of translating this word beast. Some type of beings, and maybe that's where I'll pick up next time. Some type of beings outside of beings, creatures that God created that don't look like humans, but yet they're not animals. Other creatures that God created, which Adam in the garden went about naming and giving them names. It wasn't a snake, my friend. Now the serpent, could that have been Azazel? I believe it was. I'll have more info on that months to come. It was more subtle than any of many other type beings, except not animals that we are familiar with, but other type of beings, other type of angelic beings of the field. Beings, angelic beings that were here on earth. In Enoch, we are told that he had great influence amongst all the other beings. If Satan is the general, Azazel would have been the lieutenant. And all other beings would fall under him somewhere in the hierarchy of angelic beings. Now, I have to come back to this chapter to give more clarity on what happened in that garden. But not this morning, in the months to come. Now, where was I? Now, the Act of Thomas tells us, I, Azazel, am he who inhabits and possesses the abyss of Tartarus, referring to this abyss as the great chase in which that serpent, the Genesis serpent, Azazel, was swallowed up, a clear reference to Azazel's imprisonment within the earth. This is another reason why the angel Azazel was associated with the serpent imagery represented of him in the Bible, and snakes are known to make their homes underground, a characteristic to Azazel's imprisonment within the earth. And of course, in the Apocrypha of John, warns its readers, guard yourself against the angels of misery, the angels within the valley of misery, the demons of chaos, and all who entrapped you. Beware the trap in the bowels of the underworld. It was these demons of chaos whom practitioners of chaos magic seem to invoke. The Bible speaks of Azazel as being the angel of the bottomless pit. The angel who is imprisoned within the earth. His name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek he is called Apollon. In English this translates as destroyer. This is in reference to the angel Azazel. Compare the word Apollon to the word Apollo, two names of which Azazel's cherub behemoth was known. The system of magic encapsulated in the grim known as the Greater Key of Solomon invokes the rebel angel Azazel under the name of Abaddon, identifying him as ye who by your own sin have been cast down from the heaven and from before his throne, that's God's throne, by him God who hath cast ye down unto the most profound of the abysses of hell. And that you can find in the Greater Key of Solomon, Book 1, Chapter 6. In India, the word Buddha was coined as a derivative of the name of Abaddon. In India, the great Abad, A-B-A-D, is Buddha, or Buddha, B-A-U-D-D-H-A, or Buddha, B-U-D-D-H-A, or B-A-D-D-H-A. There is connection suggested here with the abandonment of the Greeks. Azazel is what is known as the destroying angel. Describe the presence of an entire company of destroying angels, which you can find in Psalm 78:49. Compare the name of the Semitic god Dumuzi, or Dumunzi, also known as Tammuz, who represented the angel Azazel, to that of Duma, the angel of death of the Hebrews, chief of demons, which are, by the way, also known to the Islamists as the archangel of death, who likewise represented Azazel. One authority on the subject equates the god Duma, D-U-M-A, or D-U-M-A-H, to Tammuz. Remember Tammuz? You go back all the way to after the flood, shortly after, what Cush, Nimrod, Semiramis, and then Tammuz, all represented. Duma can also be called Damu. Alas, by Damu, my healer. As a healer, Damus, who is Azazel, is usually referred to the title Damu. The god Tammuz, or Azazel, was also known as Abu, A-B-U. And Azazel was also known as Adad, Hadad, Hadu. One may conceivably combine the Semitic words Ab, Abu, Hadu, Father Hadu, into the word Buddha, as well as abandon, Abad, and Adad. It is also said Buddha translates as enlightened one, derived from the root word light. Compared to the term shining one, a common moniker of angels and gods who represent angels. From the fact Azazel was also known as Abu comes the following definition of the Greek word abusos: bottomless, unbounded, the abyss, the pit, the immeasurable depth of Orcus, O-R-C-U-S. The Gaulish god Orcus, god of the underworld, a god who represented Azazel, who was entrapped within the earth, a very deep gulf or chasm in the lowest parts of the earth, used as a common receptacle of the dead, and especially the abode of demons. The Judaic name for Azazel, namely Ashmodai, A-S-H-M-O-D-A-I, also known as Ashmodeus, A-S-M-O-D-U-S, king of demons, whom Zoroastrians celebrated as Ashma Davis, derives his name from the Hebrew word Ashamod, meaning to destroy, as in destroyer, abandon, Abalon, as related above to the book of Revelations. Asmodeus, destroyer, who is Azazel, is also the symbol of anarchy. Asmodeus was portrayed as a serpent. Also identifies the serpent of the garden, who is Azazel, as being the destroyer, who is abandoned, who is Apollon, and which represent Behemoth, was also associated with the serpent representing Azazel. In fact, the Greek god Apollo was also called Python, a word employed as the name for a genus of snakes. It is also the most interesting and revealing note that the sacred world of the high degree Freemasonic Ground Council of Knights of the East and West is Abaddon. In Tablet 2 of the Emerald Templates of Hoth from Egypt, it is said concerning Azazel and his group of fallen angels, the children of light, the shining ones, the fallen angels looked down on the world. Seeing the children of men, down they descended and created bodies, taking the semblance of men as their own, living in the world on our earth as children of men incarnated, being like and yet unlike the children of men. And whereas this particular group of angels who have the appearance of men live in a dwelling place far beneath the earth's crust, beneath the surface of the earth, Azazel and his group of angels are therein identified as custodians and watchers of men who are guiding, directing the destiny of men. These angels, as well as Satan's group of rebel angels, we got a different group now, who hide themselves in the seas. Now, isn't that interesting? You have to look into that. Manipulated people in positions of power in the nations of our world. Now, that's enough for one morning. I threw a lot at you. I read all that to point out, to sum up, that throughout history, and I only given you a glimpse of it, Azazel is an evil being that's made its mark through all the ancient nations, the early Mesopotamian nations, Egyptian nations, Greek nations, influences into the areas of India and beyond, worshipped as a god. And unfortunately, and this is a sad state of our present day Christianity and the teachings on this subject, the occultists know more about Azazel than Christians. In fact, I challenge you, walk up to any Christian, at least someone that you think is a Christian, ask him, who do you think Azazel is? And they won't have a clue. Some might, because some of their Bible translations in Leviticus will have a note, the scapegoat was Azazel. But that's as far as they'll go. That's about the only information they have. And they don't even know how to interpret that information. Well, you're saying that in Revelation 9, Azazel comes back in the scene once the fifth angel does what he does? Yes. And keep it separate from the other four angels that will be released. As I pointed out, don't combine them like this author mistakenly did. Keep them separated. Now, I gave you a lot of information to chew on for a while. I'll come back to this. There's plenty more to deliver to you concerning Azazel. Now, if you found this interesting as we take another step forward in laying down the foundations that will lead to these end times and his appearance again, let me know as they play a song.